truckers stop shipments after fraud ruling against Trump. We will see how many of the 1.7 million average independent truckers actually engage in this and how it impacts New York City. But remember, again, we've seen a number of blockades like this in places like Canada as well. This is not a blockade. This is not going to stop traffic in New York. This is just trying to send a signal that, you know, you ban one of our probably somebody who provides a lot of business to those truckers in all those different apartment buildings and all those different condos and offices and Trump Tower and hotels.
The reason we're out here is we're independent.
Right.
And we don't like people telling us what to do. This movement is really more than just being about Trump. There's a lot of, and especially blue states, make it very difficult for trucks. Sending a message to New York can actually have a much larger effect. We just want some respect and to be treated like we are. And I mean, and really that treatment, we can look at the way Trump's being treated and say, you know what, we feel for the guy.
Right.
And that's probably why he gets so much of our attention, is because we know we can feel the way he's being treated.
Is there widespread support, Ron, within the independent trucking community for this move? It seems from our callers that there is, but I kind of like to get the bigger sense.
Yeah, I think that there is. Truckers and most everybody else that I would talk to were real tired of the way things are going on in this country, and that Donald Trump case. That's terrible. That's so un-American. I can't believe it.
I don't go into New York anyway or any of these other democratic cities. And New York itself is absolutely astronomical in price. Every time you cross the GW going into New York, it's over $100.
Yeah.
And, you know, Brooklyn Bridge is $30 both ways. I mean, it's too expensive, but it's just unsafe. And to me, it's just corrupt over there. I don't like going over there.
Yes, that's interesting. So even before this, and we had that in the later call, that this impact could impact other blue states because of the amount of money they charge these truckers to even get into the city to deliver the goods that their citizen needs. You think it'd be like the opposite? Maybe you'd incentivize it, build better lanes for them, make it easier to get into the city instead of making it more difficult.
I'm an independent contractor, and I don't go to the Northeast as much as possible.
Just in general, just not making the.
Is it the money like the others are talking about? That it's so expensive to even get inside the city to make the delivery?
Yes.
This is what we go back to. Like, this is more than just about New York City.
Yeah, it's regulations.
This is a signal to blue states to say, you want your goods, stop making it first making it impossible for us to go by these penalties and all these fines, plus on top of that, all the extra cost it takes just to deliver goods that your people need.
To not deliver to New York City. Like I really loved the first caller we had. It said, really has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It really has to do with the fact that this is what we're dealing with on a daily basis. So with that, I find it really kind of fascinating. I never would have thought from that perspective. They certainly want to go out and demonize these characters. And look, there's part of me that looked at it this morning and goes, you know, I do wish sometimes, you know, people do their job, you know, is it that? But then I look at it and I listen to the callers. We're having an in-depth conversation, and you should go back and listen to that call if you didn't hear it, because really able to break down what it is for these truck drivers and for these companies to make their deliveries to some of these blue states, not necessarily just New York. So yeah, some things may push them over the edge, but it's not always politically motivated in the traditional sense.
They're not blocking the streets. It's not a blockade. It's just them as individuals taking action. Of course, we support that kind of action at the ACLJ because we do believe that this was just an absurd ruling. Think about it like this. This is the same judge who said Mar-a-Lago was worth, what, like $15 to $18 million? You cannot buy a lot in Palm Beach right now that's half the size of Mar-a-Lago.
You have a victimless crime here. You've got a crime in which there are no victims, nobody who has been harmed, nobody who has been hurt, nobody who has suffered financial loss, and yet you impose this enormous fine on him for doing business and succeeding. And I don't understand how a judge can think that that is advancing the cause of justice in any way when you have a business person who has done so much for the city of New York, for the nation for that matter, and what you're doing is stifling him.
It is interesting. It is a victimless crime in that sense, but New York State has a specific law that says even if there are no victims, we can still find you guilty. So even though we do know that their banks came and testified, not all of that audio was live. Remember, they just allowed photos sometimes, who all testified coming in saying they were repaid on time. They wanted to do more business with President Trump. This is not just hurting, President Trump's business. He'll figure this out in New York. He's got people he can put in charge. It's hurting the business of these banks because he's got properties all over the world, and he was someone safe to lend to because ultimately he paid them back. And that's the goal, especially on these bigger loans that you take out. So now they're in a situation too. The Trump effect, it's a trickle-down effect because the amount of properties, businesses, golf courses, employees that he owns all around the world. And I think we just all have to remember that when you talk about these decisions, which I believe are just so unfair, but also the reality we live in politics, Logan, which means if this is how politicians are going to be treated, who do you think is going to run for office in the next 4 years? And the next 4 years, it's not going to be people you can trust anymore.
Yeah, it's going to be people who can afford to risk it all, I guess, or have no reason to really do anything else.
Yeah.
I don't see anyone who's at the level of a business success like a President Trump willing to do
billionaires this hard. I mean, who else? You got to be a billionaire to run for president?
Exactly, or the opposite, or just have had no experience.
This number just seems kind of made up. I mean, Andy, it's like this judge made it up, but it could lead to a criminal trial.
It could very well lead to
that's the second
criminal.
part of this.
Well, that's what they're up to here. They're just setting him up. What they're doing is setting him up for future criminal trials, and those two are not going to succeed, as the one I think in Georgia is going to fall apart, and I think the one in the District of Columbia is going to fall apart too. Leave the man alone. He's doing good for the country in terms of the economy in New York, and yet now you're imposing a huge fine on him. Where does that get you? Nowhere, in my opinion.
Deutsche Bank, which is one of the biggest lenders in the world. And again, you don't get to Deutsche Bank unless you're going to pay your loans back. And they're a very serious company. When they testified, when Deutsche Bank loaned Donald Trump, they did this under oath company, hundreds of millions of dollars. The bank always followed its own guidelines that included checking out information that would-be borrowers provide. An executive testified Tuesday that former president's civil fraud trial, that they did their own checking. It wasn't like, oh, we trust Donald Trump, he owns a lot of buildings. Deutsche Bank actually had to approve him. And now he's being accused of fraud on Deutsche Bank. So did Deutsche Bank fraudulently analyze Donald Trump? There's no interest in them doing that because they wouldn't get repaid.